Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming out to your computers on a Tuesday night. I'm Mick Felton. I'm the publisher at Seren, which is this year celebrating its 40th birthday, which we're very pleased and proud of. We publish a number of different kinds of books, poetry, novels, books about Wales, and recently, books about justice in Wales. And tonight we're launching the Dossier, which is a very important book, I think, about 15 criminal cases in South Wales in which it is believed that there was an unsafe conviction or a miscarriage of justice. The author of the Dossier, Michael O'Brien, was the victim of one of those miscarriages of justice when he was wrongfully arrested for murder of Philip Saunders, a Cardiff newsagent. Tonight, Mike will discuss some of the issues arising from the book and from his experiences with Martin Shipton, who is now the political editor at large at the Western Mail and Wales Online. So without further ado, because you don't want to listen to me, over to Martin and Mike.
Thank you very much, Mick. Well, when I was asked to do this tonight, I was very pleased to do so because I've known Mike for a very long time. In fact, the first time I met him was on the day I think that he was released from prison, or at least when he arrived in Cardiff back to his home in Ely in West Cardiff. And I was working as a reporter for Wales on Sunday newspaper at the time. This is 23 years ago. And he had been released on bail with his two co-defendants after serious doubts had arisen about his conviction. And Mike had spent 11 years in prison for a murder that he did not commit. And I have to say that I got to know Mike quite well over the years. I've written quite a lot of stories about him and about his case and about other cases that he has taken an interest in. And I think that given the pressure that he was put under, and we'll ask him about this in a minute, I think that he has shown great resilience, and I think it's wonderful that he has become a champion of people who are victims of miscarriages of justice. And this latest book that he's produced, and he's produced several, is really, if you like, a testament to the fact that he is a very committed individual who knows what it means to have been the victim of a miscarriage of justice, and he doesn't want others to suffer in the same way that he did, and that is something which has driven him all these years. But Mike, if I can introduce you now into the conversation. Before we get to talk about the nitty-gritty of the cases, I thought it would be helpful for people to see, if you like, the human factor of miscarriage of justice by getting you to talk for a little bit about what impact it has had on you as an individual. I mean, obviously it's taken a big portion of your life, 11 years is a hell of a long time, but what impact has being falsely accused, falsely convicted, and falsely imprisoned for such a long time had on you as a person?
Well, I think it's changed my whole personality. I used to be a very quiet person before I went into prison, and I wouldn't argue with anybody. And prison changed me completely, 100%. Now I'm very forthright, outspoken, and say it very much like it is. Please or offend type of person now. And I mean, I never used to be like that. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing at times. Sometimes I drop myself in it at times, because I'm so forthright, but I wear my heart on my sleeve, The impact mentally it's had on me has been appalling. I mean, I suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder still. I still see a psychiatrist every month. I'm on medication to cope with everyday life. Without my medication, I can't get out of bed in the mornings. Everything which people take for granted, like just going in and having a shower and a shave, becomes a trauma for me, because all I can remember is what happened to me when I was in prison. And it's very difficult to get away from prison, because I've seen 7 inmates who were killed by different inmates, you know what I mean? And they died. One of them died in front of me. This is the harsh reality of prison. And when you see people dying around you or getting injured every single day of your sentence, it leaves deep scars which will never go away. You have to learn to live with it, which is what I've done. But you never get over something like that. But that's the mental impact it's had on me. And I've been out now, 23 years, and it's still having an impact on me today.
Now, we're going to talk about the details of your case shortly, but one thing I think that a lot of people might be puzzled about is the fact that you eventually were vindicated. The Court of Appeal quashed your convictions, and you could, had you so chosen, as it were, take your compensation and go off and have a quiet life. But you chose not to do that, and for all these years, you've been campaigning on behalf of other people. What was it that made you adopt that particular course rather than just, as it were, taking the money and going to have a quiet life?
Well, I had a lot of friends inside. I made a lot of friends who I knew were innocent. Peter Fell was one of them. George Long, the Guildford Four. I met some of the Birmingham Six, and they inspired me to fight back when I was in prison. And I said, I made a vow that I would, once, if I got my name cleared, I would not only go out and try and get, their names cleared, or as many people as I could help, but I would also try and work on the death penalty as well, because I used to have a pen friend when I was in Longlat in prison, and his name was Brian Robertson, and they executed him in 2000. And I made a vow to that man that if I got my name cleared first, that I would fight for the death penalty in America. And I wrote a book called The Killing Justice in the Lone Star State on that one to add my weight to the cause. And it's like my autobiography. When I wrote my autobiography, I done it to inspire people, and these are the things I've tried to do. And I'm so passionate about it. I feel for the innocent. I know what it's like to be locked up, all day, every day, knowing that you're innocent. And it's got to be one of the worst feelings in the world to know that somebody else is outside living their lives while you're doing time for their crime which they committed. And I found that very, very difficult to cope with in the early years. And I did turn to drink and drugs when I first went into prison. I tried to blot everything out of my mind. But then I realized I had a problem, and I went to get help. Luckily, there was some help available in the prison with a prison psychologist and psychiatrist. And then I started fighting back. And then one day I got up and I said, I'm not taking this. I'm not taking this lying down. I need to do something. I need to educate myself. I need to study law. I need to know what's gone wrong in my case. And I needed to know the ins and outs of everything about my case. And that's what I went on to do. And I never stopped.
That's right, Mike. Well, let's take a closer look at your case. It's quite coincidental, but the murder that was committed that you were wrongly convicted of actually occurred literally about 5 minutes away from my house here in Cardiff. And so I know exactly where it was. I mean, you were a young lad, weren't you, at the time that that this event happened? How did it happen that you got arrested for this crime?
Well, I wasn't a goody two shoes. I'm going to be honest with you. You know what I mean? I was going down the road of criminality. I used to go out with my friends and steal cars for joyriding, even though I couldn't drive personally. I used to go along with them because I wanted to fit in and be one of the boys. And that, where you come from, my background, that's what you try and do. I didn't fit in well in school, and on the night in question, we were out trying to steal a car for joyriding purposes. But, we did not kill anybody, you know what I mean? And I was adamant about that in the police station. They weren't interested about the fact that we stole a car. They were more interested in what we hadn't done, which really was disturbing.
There was no forensic evidence against you or the other two guys involved. Really, there were two factors in your conviction, weren't there, Mike? There was the fact that the police or one particular police officer made up things that you were supposed to have said and that he was supposed to have overheard. And also the other element was the fact that one of your co-accused actually confessed to the crime. Although you go into great detail in the book about the interviews with Darren Hall that occurred, and anybody reading that would think there are so many inconsistencies in what he was saying that between various interviews, and I think altogether there were 10 or 11 interviews that the police conducted with him, and he was confessing to things, and the details were changing all the time. Sometimes he'd just been the lookout, sometimes he had actually actively participated in the killing, he'd taken the lead, and there was differences that he said about the personnel who were there at the same time. But I mean, there are all these inconsistencies, and yet somehow people obviously sitting on the jury were convinced there was no smoke without fire and decided to convict you. What you had to do in those years after you'd been convicted, with the help of lawyers and other experts, was really to look very carefully at what had actually gone on. I mean, that's what you were faced with, wasn't it? You had to. It wasn't easy. Once you've been convicted of murder, it is not easy to overturn, and you had to engage the assistance of some experts in different, very specialist fields in order to get your conviction quashed. How did you cope with all of that stuff going on when you were still, a very young lad?
I found it very, very difficult. But I knew one thing. I knew Darren Hall was not telling the truth when he said we committed the crime. Now, what I didn't know, and what many people might not know unless you read the book, is the fact that Darren Hall had a history of confessing to things he hadn't done previously. And that wasn't disclosed to our defence team. The same as that police officer who was outside the cells and alleged he had a conversation between me and Ellis Sherwood, which was highly incriminating. He had done it in numerous other cases as well, which is illustrated in the book. And I mean, had the jury known that, I don't think we wouldn't even been charged, let alone taken to trial. And I do want to say this in relation to the jury: it wasn't their fault. I don't blame them in any way, shape, or form for my wrongful conviction. That squarely lies at the CPS's door for allowing that kind of evidence to be placed before the jury in the first place. And, South Wales Police have got to take responsibility as well for some of the evidence which is used and some of the unsavory characters they used to give false evidence against us. So, I do want to stress that, because many people have asked me about the jury and what would I say if I met some members of the jury. And I got to be honest with you, if I met members of the jury, I feel really sorry for them. I would shake their hand and say, well, you were lied to. It wasn't your fault. You know what I mean? And I have a bit of sympathy for them, to be honest, because what would I have done if I was on the jury and I was listening to that kind of evidence?
I think the thing is, Mike, and one of the things that goes to the heart of this whole issue about miscarriages of justice is that people perhaps naturally think, and the majority of jurors would think, that police officers are going to tell the truth. And this whole idea that you can have a situation where police officers will systematically tell lies about what they have overheard in order to incriminate somebody is something that is a bit beyond many people's consciousness. I think, particularly at the time we're talking about, maybe we're a bit more cynical these days after so many cases have exposed what the police have done in bad circumstances. But at the time, I mean, looking at the culture of the force, and if you look at some of the other cases as well, where you've got the same police officer who is involved in just actually making things up, sometimes with colleagues. I mean, there was one instance, wasn't there, in another trial another case called the Welsh bombing trial, where One of the defendants, for example, was just sort of sitting there being interviewed and wasn't saying anything at all. And the police just said, well, okay, if you won't give the answers, we'll give the answers. And they just made it all up. Was that culture of impunity something that I mean, you obviously became aware of it after what happened to you, but was it something that shocked you, Mike? In the sense that, you don't expect police officers to behave that way.
Well, let me just go back a bit further. Before all this happened to me, I had no reason to believe that police officers lied. You know what I mean? I just couldn't comprehend that whatsoever. I think what the stark reality was for me was when the police officer come up to me and said, "This is what you and Ellis Sherwood said in the cells," and I knew I didn't say that. It dawned on me then what was going on, that they were verbaling me up, and that's what they called them, verbals. And I had to accept that police officers lied then because I seen it with my own eyes. But sometimes you've got to see it with your own eyes before you get the gist of it. And I learned some harsh lessons. Some of my friends used to say to me, the police are trying to frame me, they're trying to do this to me. And I used to say, well, you must be doing something. They won't just pick on you for no reason at all. You must be on their radar or whatever the case may be. And I judged them, and I judged them wrongly. And look how it panned out for me. I learned the harsh and a hard lesson the hard way. And when I was going through all these cases, when I was writing the dossier, you could see there was a systematic disregard for the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. And that's the key as well.
I mean, when you were being interviewed at the time when the police were interviewing you, and it became clearer and clearer that they were prepared to lie about what had happened. I mean, what sort of impact did that have on you mentally? Because you must have thought, am I ever going to get out of this? This is a complete nightmare. How can I possibly escape from this when, who is going to be believed? Is it going to be me, or is it going to be the police officers? And the likelihood is that it's going to be the police officers.
Well, before I went to trial, I was quite traumatized because I lost my daughter on remand. She died of a cot death. And I was in a very bad mental state in any event due to that, as well as facing the trial. And my solicitor said to me, if they believe Darren's confession, even though there's inconsistencies and what he's saying doesn't pan out, and if they believe the police officer with the confession outside the cells, that we were going away for a very, very long time. But in my heart, I was still clinging on to the hope that they don't convict innocent people. And I was so naive. I could not believe it. But then on July the 20th, when they found us guilty for something we hadn't done, all my darkest fears and my worst nightmare came true. And, I was devastated. I can't explain it. I remember saying to my father, I turned to my stepfather and I said to him, Dad, as long as you know I never done it, that's all which matters to me. And I was crying. I was very upset about it. And I said to the jury, you've got it wrong. We're all innocent. You just don't know what you've just done.
Did you think at the time, and do you think now, that it was a case of there being, this particular police officer whose name crops up in several cases in the book, it's just a sort of a bad apple. He was a bad apple policeman. Or do you think that it was that the sort of activity that he engaged in and others engaged in, do you think that it was more of something that was endemic to the police system at the time?
Well, I think there was certainly a methodology of the police at a particular time to gain confessions, and by any means necessary. I mean, you look at the Guildford 4, Birmingham 6, they're outside of Cardiff. They're not in Wales, but then the same methodology is applied across the board, in England, Ireland, Scotland, and they all got that common thread of getting a confession out of the vulnerable suspect. The Cardiff 3 and the Darvell brothers is a classic cases, which is in the book. They had a vulnerable co-accused, and they built a case around that confession. They did exactly the same with ours. That's 3 cases. What's the chances of that occurring in a short circumference of Wales when we've only got a population of like 3-4 million? You know, I mean, you've got to look at it on, well, if we talk legal terms, the reasonable man, would the reasonable man expect that to happen? And I would say no, they wouldn't expect that to happen, because if it happens once, you can accept that. But if it happens twice or 3 times, that is not an accident. That is by accident design, deliberately causing miscarriages of justices. And that's what have occurred here. And I hear the police saying that they've changed now and it's 2021 and things have moved on. I'm not saying those things are not true. What I'm saying is the past hasn't been dealt with. And right up till 2016, miscarriages of justices were still occurring using some of the same methods which convicted me and many others before. So that's only 5 years ago. That's not that long ago. And we also got to remember nobody's been held accountable for any of these cases. And I don't mean just the police, because it's not just the police who've caused these miscarriages. You've got to look at the CPS, the barristers and the solicitors who didn't do their jobs.
Let's look at another of the cases which has had a lot of notorious publicity, even recently, and that's the case of David Morris. Now, he was convicted of killing 3 generations of a family in the Swansea Valley, the Cluddock murders. You have been absolutely convinced that he was innocent.
Yes.
Now, I remember taking a telephone call from you quite recently in August of this year, and you said there were rumors going around that he died in his cell. I rang up the Ministry of Justice and established that that actually had happened, that he had died in his cell. This is somebody who was tried for the murders twice and convicted on both occasions. And yet, of course, the intriguing thing about the whole case, which is a tragic case, is that there were people who were initially arrested who were actually involved with the police themselves, weren't there? There was a police officer who was arrested. I mean, do you suspect that Di Morris was, as it were, fitted up because he was a convenient fall guy who took attention away from other suspects? Let's put it like that.
Absolutely. I mean, what you've got to look at is Di Morris was very drunk that night. There was people who saw him on the night in question. There's no possible way he could get from A to B in the time allowed, cleaned up all the DNA evidence, which they were talking about, you know what I mean, and left no forensic evidence at that particular time until recently with a new development, which was only his own blood, I had hastened to add, on a sock. That doesn't mean to say that he killed those people in the house, because he was having an affair with Mandy Power, or it was alleged he had an affair. Let me get that straight. You know what I mean? So if that was indeed the case, and the gold chain which was found at the house, you would have thought that you would have left some items there anyway. So, there could be innocent explanations how blood got on the chain. There was innocent explanations how there's his own blood on the sock. I would be more concerned if it was Mandy Power's blood on the sock and it was Di Morris's. Then you could have turned around and said, well, it looks like X, Y, and Z. The police may have been right. But when you look at all the bigger picture here, and if you look at the Cluddock Murders book, which again Cyril have published, and John Morris, my good friend, has wrote that book. I got to be honest, fabulous book. Anyone want to read it? That's where you get the facts, and you can see that it was impossible for Di Morris to have done what they said in the time allowed. It was just impossible. And the BBC done a program on the Cluddock murders. They uncovered some new evidence, and it was all brushed aside. Now, what concerns me more than anything is South Wales Police investigating South Wales Police. They said it was an independent inquiry, but South Wales Police still got their hands on it. Now, in my case, there was 3 investigations when I was in prison, all carried out by South Wales Police, 2 carried out when I was out, and they all come to the conclusion that we were guilty. And it wasn't until an outside force came into my case, the Thames Valley Police, and they done a damning report on South Wales Police. Everything I said about what the South Wales Police did was in that report. So there's been no real independent inquiry into the Di Morris case, as far as I'm concerned.
Does the campaign to establish his innocence continue even though he's no longer with us?
Absolutely. I mean, you look at the cases of Timothy Evans, who was wrongly hung, Mohammed Matan. Should they have given up when they executed them in 1952, respectively? I mean, 40 odd years later, Mohammed Matan had his name cleared. Timothy Evans had his name cleared. Okay, there's a lot of arguments to say, though, what good is that because they're dead now? It's their family. It's a matter of righting the wrongs, if you like. And I think we're going to do the same with Di Morris's case because, regardless of what has been said in the newspapers recently, if you take a step back from that and have a look what the evidence actually is, it doesn't actually prove anything. It doesn't actually prove that he killed those people which they allege that he killed. But I mean, there's other witnesses as well in the book and other suspects in the book as well who should be looking over their shoulder, in my view.
Now, in the case relating to the murder of Lynette White, which is referred to as the Cardiff Three, obviously that has recently come into prominence again as a result of a dramatization that was shown on TV. What do you think that particular case tells us about the culture that existed within South Wales Police at the time?
Well, I think there was a systematic disregard for the suspect's rights, denial of access to lawyers, which I think is a basic human right. I mean, if you look at Stephen Miller's interview and what the Court of Appeal said, it was a damning indictment on what the police got away with. And they actually recorded it and had it on video. I think they accused Stephen Miller of the murder 300 times. He turned around and said, "I didn't do it." How many more times did they want, did they want him to say it? You could see they were putting pressure on him. You just imagine what they done to my co-accused when they didn't record it and there was nobody there to police it whatsoever. I mean, it was even worse for us because of that. And yet the PACE Act was brought in to protect people like Darren Hall and the Stephen Millers and the Darvell brothers, vulnerable people like that. And it failed us. It failed all of us.
I think there is serious concern, though, isn't there, these days about the criminal cases review body that was instrumental in a number of the cases being looked at. I mean, in the book, you really talk about how it's no longer doing its job properly. What do you think the problem is there then? I mean, does that mean that there are people inside now who are victims of miscarriage of justice who will find it more difficult, even more difficult than you did, to get themselves exonerated? Absolutely,
yes, there is cases like that. I mean, I've looked at 50 cases with a good friend of mine, Michael Norton, Dr. Michael Norton from Bristol University, and he has numerous cases. Dennis Eady from the Innocence Project has numerous cases as well, where there's cases which should have been sent back. Michael Atwell and John Roden case, which they 25 years. It's a long time for them to do, and yet they are innocent. There's no doubt about it in my mind, and yet the CCRC, in their wisdom, will not send the case back to the Court of Appeal. You've got Jeremy Bamber's case, which I can't say too much at the moment because there is an application in. But, these are the cases. Susie May, there's Eddie Guilfoyle, there's many, many others I could tell you about where new evidence has come to light, but has not been placed before any judge or jury, and the CCRC are playing the Court of Appeal role, which they have no right to do. My attitude is this: if there is new facts or new evidence which was not available at the time of trial, the case has to be referred. And they've got a pretext that the real possibility test, the real possibility that it's going to be overturned. And if they don't think that the real possibility the case is going to be overturned, they won't refer it even when there's new evidence there. Well, who are they to make that call? They have no right to do that. That's for a judge to do or a jury to do, in my professional opinion, of course.
Do you think they're under-resourced? Is that why they're not taking cases forward?
Well, they don't investigate cases like they used to, and I think a lot of it is down to funding. But the thing is, the CCRC are very reluctant to criticise the government, and that lays where the problem lies. Because if I was a body and I was working in the same capacity as the CCRC, and I couldn't do my job properly because I had lack of funding, I'd be shouting from the rooftops. And I don't understand why the CCRC don't shout from the rooftops when that doesn't happen, because their funding is being cut by half from what I've been told. And if that is true, they're getting more and more cases every year. So the resources are not going to stretch to the investigations. So therefore, they're going to have to vet each case and see which one has the most merit. And that's going to leave many vulnerable, innocent people without redress. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the CCRC needs to be either reformed, where they're sending these cases back and they're doing proper investigations, or they need to be abolished and replaced by a body which has some teeth and will get to the bottom of these injustices.
Now, you're calling for a judicial inquiry into these cases of miscarriages of justice that you've outlined in your book. What good do you think a judicial inquiry would do?
Well, I think a judicial inquiry would do a number of things. I think, first of all, we have to have accountability. I don't see why just because all the years have gone past, there's no time limit on a criminal offence according to the statute. If that is indeed the case, numerous criminal offences have been committed against myself and various other victims of miscarriages of justice. And also, I want all these cases reopened so we can catch the real killers behind these cases, because they're still at large, and I feel for the victim's family, and I really do. I mean, in the case of Philip Saunders, what would I do if somebody done that to my family? I'd be devastated. I'd want to know who killed them. And I think the most important person, as far as I'm concerned, is the victim's family. And the only way we're going to get these cases reopened is by a judicial inquiry set up by a High Court judge, a retired High Court judge, to look at all these cases to find out, first of all, what's gone wrong, 2, how we can rectify it and stop it from happening again, and 3, to reopen these cases and try and find the real killer, because we owe that to the victim's family. We mustn't forget them. I feel so strongly about the victim's family, because it's just an awful thing. We got something in common. I want to see the bugger who done this to the Philip Saunders behind bars. He ruined my life as much as he ruined Philip Saunders. I might be alive, but I'm a shell of a person I once was. So you know what I mean. I'm some days I'm just existing, and the thing which keeps me going is my young son, Dainton. That's what keeps me going and keeps me alive, to be honest with you. And I've got a little clique of friends around me, not many, but a handful, who keep me on my feet and help me when I need things. When I need to sort of survive, So that's what I'm coming from. So I do hope a judicial inquiry will be set up. It'd be interesting to see how many MPs, AMs, and members of Parliament back us on this call, because this isn't just for the victims of miscarriages of justice. This has to include the victim's family in each and every case.
Have you got an inkling who the real killer was in your case?
I certainly have a number one suspect. I got to be careful what I say for legal reasons, but in my book, The Death of Justice, and in this book, I have actually mentioned the person who was harassing Philip Saunders a few days before he died. By all accounts, he went home with him, and a person actually described him to a T, and the police disregarded this person. Very, very worrying indeed. There was a number of other statements where they saw one person harassing Mr. Saunders, and a significant thing in the book was Mr. Saunders was attacked between 1983 and 1987 on at least 20 odd occasions from various people who tried to rob him, and that was not disclosed to our defence. We were still in school. So somebody knew that he had money, and somebody knew what they were doing.
And one of the things about your case as well, and it isn't just your case where this happened, it also happened in the case of the Cardiff Three, for example, was that at the very outset of the police inquiry after the murder, they issued a description of the prime suspect, who didn't bear any relationship or any physical resemblance to yourself or the other your co-defendants, and that also was the case in the Cardiff Three case. What is it, do you think, Mike, that gets into the police to get them so driven to pin the crime on somebody who is innocent? Do you think, in your particular case, do you think that the police officers involved actually believed that you were the killer, or was it just a convenient thing for them to solve the crime?
Well, I think they're under a lot of pressure, the police, to be fair to them, you know what I mean? And I understand that, when there's an outcry from the public, Philip Saunders was a well-known figure in Cardiff, from what I can gather. I never really heard of him, to be honest with you, because I had no dealings with business people or anything like that. But, during my research, he was well-liked by all accounts. He was hard-working, and he was just an ordinary guy, and he was well liked. And the thing for me is, I want to know who done it. I really want to know who done it. I really do.
So, what prospect do you think there is of getting this judicial inquiry? Because in order to have any chance, you're going to have to mobilize a lot of support from politicians, aren't you? Because it's only the politicians who can put pressure, ultimately, I presume, on the Home Secretary to order the inquiry.
Yes, but what I was thinking as well is whether a judicial review could be taken if, once the decision is taken from the Home Office not to order a judicial inquiry, or if they think there's not, whether they can be challenged by way of judicial review, because I feel there is a need for one. It's in the public interest that we know what has gone wrong in these cases. We need to bring to book anybody who's caused these miscarriages of justice. Why should they be allowed to get away with it, with pensions or whatever the case may be? Now, as I said, I'm not talking just about the police, because I don't want to go police bashing for any reason whatsoever, because there was other people who were just as guilty as the police, like the CPS, as I've already explained. Why should they get away with wrongdoing, or what they call, in law, they call it misfeasance in a public office? And that basically means, in a nutshell, for people who might not understand that, is they've abused their power. They didn't have the power to do what they did, and they acted in a malicious manner. Well, you can't act more than a malicious manner than putting an innocent man behind bars for something he hasn't done. You see police officers go into prison every day when he gets his hands in the till, or if he gets caught having sex. There was one the other week, I think, where he got caught having sex on duty. They sacked him straight away. But yeah, on a miscarriage of justice case, you catch him out lying and framing people, and nothing happens to him. I find that really, really absurd. I mean, when you put it into that context. And I just want to just say one thing here: not one police officer, not one solicitor, not one barrister, nobody has been brought to book for these miscarriages of justice in Wales. with the exception of the Cardiff three, where they were victims themselves, vulnerable people who were forced to give evidence because of South Wales Police, and they got 18-month sentences. I can't go into details about the names and everything but it's to do with the Cardiff three. But these are the facts. Do you know what I mean? In the whole of the UK, only 2 police officers have ever been sent to prison for causing miscarriages of justice. One was in the Jed Cawley affair, and one was in Stephen Kisco's case, where he got wrongly convicted of rape. And they're the only 2 cases you will find in my research where police officers have been held accountable. Why is that? Why are they getting away with it? If we want to stop miscarriages of justice from happening, you have to remember this: accountability has to be at the forefront, because if you allow these things to go on, then there's going to be always miscarriages of justice, no matter where we go, no matter what we try and do. And I've tried to stop miscarriages of justice. I've managed to stop cases going to court in the past, and things like that, because I've used my evidence, a similar fact case or some other law I've worked on. But sometimes some of them slip through the net. And even with the best intentions of myself and other people like Gareth Pierce and other good solicitors like Maxine Twynham and things like that, the door is going to be open and some of them are going to slip through. Mm-hmm. And that's really worries me.
Mm. Got a few questions from people who are tuning in, Mike, and I'll go through them just at the end here. So the first one is, how can we, the general public, help to get the Cardiff News Station case reopened?
Well, I think I think what we can do is write to the Chief Constable. I'm hoping to get a meeting with the new Chief Constable. I don't know this one in particular. I knew Matt Dukes quite well. But I think we can put pressure by writing to our MPs and getting them to write to the Home Secretary and to the Chief Constable, saying, we need these cases reopened, because the only people who can do it is the members of the public. Without the public support, it's very difficult to engage with the authorities, because they can brush people like me off. But if you've got 10,000 members of the public who have wrote letters in saying, well, this case needs to be sorted because of, and it holds massive sway. But I can't tell people what. I can only advise people what I would do if they was a member of the public, like writing in letters and stuff, and just letting them know that the case ain't going away. And I'll be honest with you, as long as there's breath in my body, I will never ever give up looking for the murder of Philip Saunders. I will never give up on trying to get the people who've done what they did, not only to me, but to the other people involved in the dossier, justice, because that's all I'm looking for. It's not a case of police bashing or, anti-authority or anything like that. That's not me at all. I've worked with the authorities on certain parts of my case. Matt Dukes was an exceptional police officer, in my view, the last Chief Constable. He actually apologized to me and wrote me a letter via my MP and said that we were victims of a miscarriage of justice. And it's the first time in 30 odd years that I've had some sort of an apology. And I thought that was a very brave thing to do in the current climate.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a name there. We've actually got a question from Maxine Twynham. And Maxine is asking, when you were researching the cases that you feature in your new book, did it highlight any similar areas of concern regarding some of the criminal defence solicitors' conduct, which has led to so many miscarriage of justice cases in South Wales?
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing I noticed was they wasn't up to speed with the Criminal Evidence Act, the police, what they call PACE. And in my case, there was 115 breaches of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. Handcuffing to hot radiators, long periods of time, denial of access to lawyers, which is against the law, R versus Samuels, 1988. And I noticed these solicitors wasn't picking up on these things. And it goes right across the board. Now, you cannot miss 115 breaches of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. That is not an accident. An accident, maybe you miss one or two, but when it's like over 100, that's a total disregard for my rights in the police station. And my solicitors were appalling. I'm not going to name them or shame them or anything like that. People know who they are, who are close to me. They should be ashamed for what they didn't do, and that was to defend us.
But do you think it's incompetence, or is it complicity with the police?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it's a bit of both. I don't think it's just one thing in particular, because I can't believe that when it comes to incompetence is like missing one or two. 115 is just a bit hard for me to swallow, to be honest with you. In my personal opinion, how can you miss so much? How could you not challenge somebody, hang up to a radiator? That's a human rights violation under Article 3, the right not to be tortured and abused. No food and no water while we're in the police station. I mean, you hear about that in Iran, or you might hear about it in Taiwan or other countries, but not in Britain. But it did happen.
Mm-hmm. To what extent, here's another question, to what extent are the media complicit in promoting the police line that we've got the right people?
Well, I think it's certain newspapers and editors who take the line that there's no smoke without fire. I mean, I wouldn't trust the Daily Fail, as I call them, or the Sun newspaper, for instance. My experience is they lied about the Hillsborough, the Sun newspaper did. Well known, well documented what they did. It was other newspapers who've done the same, the tabloid newspapers, and they're relentless because they rely on their local stories from the police. So therefore, they're not going to upset them, and you've got to remember that as well. So they're blinkered, some of the journalists, as well as members of the public, and even people like myself. Like, I was blinkered. I used to believe in those newspapers when I was a kid. The Sun newspaper, I used to love that. I used to think it was great. Do you know what I mean? They told the truth. And then everything I believed in went out the window.
Mm-hmm. Here's another one. Do you draw a distinction between a miscarriage of justice and an unsafe conviction? Are all of the cases in the dossier miscarriages of justice?
Absolutely, every single one of them, in my opinion, professional opinion, yes. I do believe that. I wouldn't have put them in the book if I didn't think they were miscarriages of justices. And a miscarriage of justice, what people define as a miscarriage of justice, is a mistake. Technically, these were not mistakes. These were deliberate acts.
Final question, and this is an interesting one. Funnily enough, I've just bought this book today, so I'm looking forward to reading it. It's a book that is written by Nadifa Mahmoud, and it's a novel called The Fortune Men, which is all about the wrongful conviction of Mahmoud Matan in Cardiff way back in the early 1950s. And so the question is, the Booker Prize winner will be announced tomorrow evening. The book is shortlisted, which is historical fiction based on a horrific Cardiff miscarriage of justice. Do you think if it wins this year's Booker Prize, it could do much for the miscarriage of justice cause?
Absolutely, yes. I think it could. I think it could really bring it to the forefront, and I do hope that author does win. I would certainly support a book like that. Mahmoud Matan's case, I actually knew Mahmoud Matan's sons. I knew Omar, and I knew Mervyn as well, and I discussed their father with him on numerous occasions. I got photographs taken with him at the Norwegian church. Sadly, we lost Omar to he decided to walk into the sea when he was in Scotland. He couldn't cope with it no more, and he killed himself. And that had an effect on me as well. Like, knowing what they were traumatized by what happened with their father, and the story needs to be told, and maybe a film should be made. This is why we should never bring back the death penalty. I hear people calling for it all the time, but if one person gets wrongly executed, it's just not right. It's not on. and we live in a civilized society today, or supposed to. So what is civilized about killing people?
Well said, Mike. Well, look, I'm sure that everybody here wishes you well with this book. If you haven't seen it, this is here it is, and it's in shops. It can be bought actually from Amazon. Although I did see that they were running out Amazon, weren't they? There's only one left or something not that long ago. But it can obviously be bought also from the Seren website. So I've read it, and it's an impressive book. It covers the topic extremely well, and I would thoroughly recommend it to everyone. So very good luck to you, Mike, and I hope the book does well.
Well, can I
And
just?
it's book of the month, isn't it?
Yeah, it is book of the month. Yeah, I think it's brilliant. But the book council, I think Mick Felton and Sarah's done a fantastic job in managing to do that. It's brilliant. I'm really pleased. I'm really pleased the way the book is being received, and I'm sure once people read the book, it will, other people will want to read it because it's so powerful. I mean, when you see the lives which have been destroyed, I mean, and still being destroyed. So let's not forget there's still some innocent people still in prison who I wrote about in the book, like Roy Moore. He's in prison, and I believe he was a victim of a miscarriage of justice, and they used informers, and that's another angle of the cases we haven't discussed tonight. Which there's so many things we could talk about with the book. We'd be here all day, but and all night. But prison informers, they got to stop using that kind of evidence because that is one of the heart of miscarriages of justice is in the previous cases. But I'd just like to say thank everybody for coming tonight. And I'd like to thank Martin as well, because you know what I mean. I know you haven't been well, and it's good to see you back on your feet, actually, Martin. And I appreciate what you've done here tonight. I also like to thank Mick Felton. He's put up with a bit of crap from me over the last few days, weeks. Because I've been a bit stupid and things, and I get a bit paranoid. And I'd like to thank Sarah as well for the same reasons, because I can have my off days, you know what I mean? And I can be hard to work with sometimes, and I accept that. And would like to apologise for anything that I have caused anybody any problems. But yeah, basically, thank you to everybody. You've just all been brilliant, and let's just hope this book, I don't know, brings about some more change, and it'll be fantastic.
Well, thank you, Mike. And nothing to apologise for, believe me. Thanks to Martin for expertly taking us through the many, many topics that this book raises. I've written down 2 or 3 things here. One is courage, actually, because I wasn't aware of everything that Mike has been through. And I think Martin said he was resilient earlier. And I think actually he's courageous as well to do this work after all the things that have happened to him. The other 2 things I've got down is one, that the book and the attitude of the police questions the basis of the civilized society that we hope we all live in. And we hope that the book will bring about some sort of change and will encourage, as Mike says, people to write to their MPs and their MSs to ask for a judicial inquiry into all these cases. So thank you, Mike, for letting us publish your book, which I think is a very important one. Thanks to everyone for coming along to this evening and taking part with really interesting questions. And we wish Mike, we wish the book, and we wish everyone who's with us well this evening. Thanks very much, and good night to you all.